Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our final episode of the year of our Keys webinar. We're going to take a moment to think about the year just gone in these polycrisis times, consider what we learned along the way, and look ahead to think about the opportunities that lie in store for us. And to help us do that, I'm delighted to have with us a fantastic panel of experts from across Ipsos. We've got Michelle in Paris, who's going to help us think through the business story of the year, generative AI, and help us think about where we go next. Then we've got Aurélie, who travels a lot, but she's in Paris today, and she's going to help us think through some of the communications highlights of the year, what we learned and what we can do more of in the future. And finally, we're going to go to China, where we welcome back to the Keys stage Patrick, a friend of this series, who is going to help us think through where China goes next in its next phase. To kick off though, I'm going to give you a little bit of a tour of public opinion. And as I do, and as you hear from the speakers, please think about any questions you may have. And we've got some time to do that at the end of the webinar, and we'll follow up afterwards as well with any questions. So we're looking forward to your comments and thoughts as we go through. My presentation about the public mood got me starting with last year, because as you do, I look back at this presentation this time last year when I did a 12-month tour of public opinion, and I was immediately reminded that this time last year, we were still talking about COVID. 1st of January 2022, COVID was still the biggest issue facing our country around the world. Of course, last year's story was the rise in inflation, not in every country, but in many countries around the world. The cost of living crisis had become a real phenomenon, something that perhaps had not been expected, including by the central bankers. This time last year, we were asking the question about whether we'd reached peak inflation. After all, it had been number one for 8 consecutive months. Look at that rise, surely it's going to fall away as we move into 2023. Well, today, it's still there at number one for the 20th consecutive month. Yes, it looks like it's maybe on a plateau. Maybe now we can say we've reached peak concern about inflation. A couple of signs that might point in that direction. Our inflation monitor shows that the proportion who think the rate of inflation is going to rise is lower than it was 18 months ago. And we've also got a rise in the proportion who think their disposable income is going to have an uptick over the next year. But let's see where we go on that. What is clear though, that these cost of living crises and questions have led to some changes in our vocabulary as consumers. We've noticed shrinkflation, or at least 1 in 2 of us in our country, with product sizes becoming smaller, but the price perhaps remaining the same as the organisations reflect on how better to conserve consumers who are under pressures. We're also seeing some questions about what it means for brands. We know that people often are quite attached to brands. 61% say they like to buy brands that reflect their values. But we also know that the more we are facing pressure, the more private label brands, value brands might come to the fore. So there's a real dynamic that we still need to think about, even if the cost of living pressures may have peaked. Now, going into 2023, we ask people to predict what will happen in the year ahead. 57% of the public globally said it would be the hottest year on record. And sadly, they were right. We now find more than half the population around the world are saying that climate change is already having a severe effect on the area where they live. And in some countries, it's even higher than that. Mexico, Turkey, South Korea, 3 countries, 3 different continents, all have over 70% saying climate change can be felt right here, right now, where I live. So on one level, we perhaps may not be surprised at this single statistics. 75% say we're heading for a disaster if we don't change our habits quickly. But, and there is a but, the urgency for taking action is not quite where it was. Yes, that 75% is quite a large number in percentage terms, but if you look at that percentage and you look at the change between last year and this year, in most countries, including mine, in Great Britain, we're in the decline. we're feeling it's less urgent than before, and perhaps the urgent questions are taking hold around this topic more, and climate change is having to take a little bit of a backseat. So huge questions for us to think about on that topic. On politics, it's been a dynamic year. We went into the year with the number of populist world leaders at a 20-year low. But as we've seen with the election of Javier Milei in Argentina, or the electoral success of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, populism is certainly part of the political dynamic in many countries around the world. We need to be ready as we go into next year, the biggest election year ever, 2 billion people going to the polls, but big questions about how democracy is working. This 7-country study that we recently released finds only one of them, Sweden, to have people more positive than negative about how things are working. The US of A, 3-to-1, people say it's going badly as they prepare for next year's presidential. Geopolitics and conflict is now a clear feature of our environment. Going into this year, we had 40% saying the war in Ukraine would end in 2023. That number is now falling. That number is now falling as we are now in day 659 of that conflict. We now have the Israel and Hamas conflict, and we have more than 100 different conflicts around the world that are being monitored by the Geneva Academy. So this instability in geopolitical terms is one that we have to have in our thoughts as we think about how the public feel and how they're going to respond in the future. Now, one thing we could predict going into 2023 were some population milestones. Patrick's going to talk about this in a moment. China's population falling for the first time since 1961. China was overtaken by India as the world's most populous country. And China is not the only country which is now losing population. In fact, we're counting 36 of them. And with fertility rates so low around the world, further population declines are baked in. Demography is now a political issue, but it also needs to be a consumer issue for those of us working with brands and with products and services around the world as populations age. So that's a quick round tour of the public mood in 2023. And as you do that, it's quite easy to get depressed. And we have to be serious about these topics. Cost of living, huge pressures, political instability, raises real uncertainty. We have those terrible conflicts around the world. We have climate change, the reality of it, but the questions about how we address it, how our governments address it, how brands address it, live right here, right now, as the COP conference continues. And we have those big questions around population pressures and how governments, businesses, and societies are going to react. But we also do have this sense of resilience. You'll see this word also later in the webinar as we reflect on where we are and where we're heading, because for all of the concerns and the pressures that we're under as people in our daily lives, 3 in 4 of us remain positive and happy about our life these days. It's actually, if anything, been improving in the last couple of years as we've perhaps emerged out of the COVID crisis, and we're seeing societies, economies, and brands showing a good degree of resilience in these uncertain times. And we tried to capture some of that spirit in our new Ipsos Almanac, where we've brought together a range of analysis, data, and thinking from around the world as we look back and look forward. Your next speaker, Michel, is one of our authors for that collection of pieces, and he's been doing a lot of work this year on generative AI. If you're like me, you may have been a little bit excited at all the wonder and the amazing things that generative AI may be able to do for our lives and our work. And if you're like me, you may have a certain element of worry about what it might mean for my work, or indeed for my society, or indeed perhaps my security. And so with that in mind, I'm delighted that we've got Michel with us to help us think through where we've been on generative AI and where we go next. Michel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Simon. Let's talk about generative AI. A review of 2023 takes us back to the start of the year, and let's go even a little further down in the past with the 30th of November 2022. and OpenAI launching the first general public application, ChatGPT, that gave us all access to the new technology that is generative AI or large language models. We have been living these times, and it was unprecedented, historic. It was a real inflection point in technology, like we will see very few in our lives. Not so much as Apollo landing on the moon, but clearly as the advent of the internet. So how do we approach this? Because when it was launched, it was really forecasted as something that was going to rock the world and change the world entirely. And 12 months forward, has everything changed? Not yet, which is a good way for us to remind ourselves of Amara's law when it comes to technology in general and generative AI in particular. We tend to overestimate the effect of technology, of a technology in the short term, and to overestimate the effect in the short term and underestimate the effect in the long run. That is very true of generative AI. It's been in the news ever since its launch, and it really felt like, again, everything was going to change almost immediately, and it hasn't. We're going to bring you some balance today in the review of the year as it comes to this new technology, with both the excitement and also the limitations. Just like Simon showed, reflected in how people feel about the technology, with 54% being very excited and 52% being nervous across the world. Does it mean, by the way, that we at Ipsos are concerned or afraid of the technology? Not at all. We're very excited. In fact, 6 months ago, in June, we launched our own generative AI platform, Ipsos Factor, with 3 main objectives: to democratize the usage of the technology and embed generative AI in the lives of our co-workers across the world. We've made it available to all 20,000 employees of Ipsos across 90 countries. The second objective was to operate transcription, codification, extraction of themes, translation, summarization, generation of top lines and ideas, creating applications to leverage the technology for efficiency and speed. The third objective is to innovate, improve existing products and offerings, or launch new ones that leverage the new technology capabilities. We've been very active with this mass experiment, and we've learned a lot, and we're still very excited. One thing we've seen related to Amara's law is that although it's a new technology that has stormed the world under our eyes, and although it is clearly unprecedented in terms of its speed of adoption, with again 1 million active users in 5 days, 100 million users in 2 months. We never saw that before with any technology or application ever. Yet, what we're seeing is, and we observe that in the way we measure with our Iris business in the UK, for instance, the users of ChatGPT, we also measure it internally at Ipsos. The innovators and early adopters have jumped on it very fast. But now the big next challenge is for the majority of us, people on this webinar, to really get into the technology and start using it on a frequent basis. It's an amazing challenge ahead of us, and we'll get there. Again, think about generative AI as the internet. Can you remember what it was working before the internet was a thing? Well, this meeting wouldn't happen before the internet, would it? I started working in the late 1990s. It was the beginning of the internet, and we still had faxes and letters and landlines, right? And it worked, but it's very hard to imagine what it was. And if you're a little younger than I am, you may not have even known the world before the internet. Think about that with generative AI in parallel. It's going to have the same magnitude of change in society in terms of how we consume, how we get informed, how do we get educated, and how do we entertain ourselves, how do we search for information. It's going to be profound. All right. Whilst we carried out our mass experiment, we have not fallen into any of the following pitfalls, which have accompanied us with the rise of the technology across the year. Let's go to April of 2023. Samsung workers do a big whoopsie. After a meeting where they discussed confidential source code, one of them had the good idea, go to the public version of ChatGPT and share it in there, and it's called public. So the confidential call became public. Oops, a huge security issue. We haven't had that at Ipsos yet, knock on wood. Hallucinations. The word isn't new, but it's taken a different meaning in 2023, thanks to or because of the technology. Here is an example from May of 2023, which you may have heard about. A senior lawyer in New York City being in front of a judge, pleading a case entirely fabricated by ChatGPT or a Gen AI model. How so? Well, the bodies of law were wrong, the points of jurisprudence were fabricated, and the judge spotted that, and of course it puts the said lawyer in a very bad spot. And it was a senior lawyer, mind you, not a trainee. And the senior lawyer had asked the Gen AI model, are you sure? And the answer was absolutely. It was wrong. So hallucinations can have a heavy toll in real life. We haven't had that either yet. Bias. Very concerning. Badly used, Gen AI can be a regression to the average. And the average is a white male that speaks English. That's the representation online. I mean, I could have shown you a slide and you can do the test for yourself. Go and generate images today and ask for images of a CEO. Guess what you're going to find? Ask for an athlete. You can guess too. A nurse? A doctor? Absolutely. There's bias everywhere in Gen AI because it is a regression to the mean if you don't use it right. So the reign of the white male, which we're all trying to get away from, of course, says the white male, to grasp the world in its diversity and its richness. Gen AI is a real threat towards that. So how we avoided those pitfalls at Ipsos, and that's our advice to you today. We've avoided it by using our evaluation framework, which predated Gen AI and is extremely relevant within the Gen AI world. Truth, beauty, justice. 3 powerful words. What do they mean? Accuracy, explainability, and ethics, fairness, security, and justice. We want to challenge ourselves every time we use the technology on those 3 dimensions. Am I sure that the output is correct? Often it isn't, at least not at first pass. Can I explain the output? If I can't, I should try again. And am I on the right side of ethics, fairness, security, and the law? Copyright, for instance, is a big deal. This is extremely important. There is no magic with Gen AI. So some people may consider it as a bit of a magic black box. Magic, it isn't. Black box, it shouldn't be. So apply an evaluation framework. Otherwise, you may lose control. And this is an example even closer to us from November of 2023 in a New York Times article relating the Guardian Australia article about a very tragic event, a woman found dead, identified as a water polo coach, as you can see. And Microsoft had turned on an interesting, an interesting new functionality that's created surveys or polls automatically. And you can see the poll on the right-hand side that was automatically generated by the Gen AI model. What do you think is the reason behind the woman's death? Murder, accident, or suicide? Obviously, it didn't go down very well. People thought it was crass, and Microsoft had to take it off. Yeah, don't let AI roam free at your own expense. How to avoid doing that? By keeping the human in the loop. Researchers, of course, when it comes to the insights industry, see Gen AI as an exoskeleton. It enables us to run faster, jump higher, and carry more weight. There is still a human in the center. Without the human, we go Terminator. Different story for another time. A human is needed at the start, in the middle, and at the end. So yes, you need a safe and agnostic technology platform, which we have with ipso facto within Ipsos. You need an evaluation framework of your own. We have our own, you can use it, there are others, but you need to challenge the output. You also need the art of the question. It's just tech. It will be as good as the usage you make of it. It is very smart, but only as smart as the input. The art of the question, the prompt engineering, which is another term that was coined in 2023 and is going to be with us for a long time. Prompt engineering is critical. Iteration over it is critical. We have a lot of literature. We've published a lot of articles that are available to you if you want on conversations with AI. Injecting the right data is also key because you are tapping into public models. There are still limitations that will go away with time in terms of the recency or the freshness of the data. But then being able to train models with the right data for your brand, for your category, for your industry, for your context, that's very important. We have a lot of data at Ipsos, obviously, that helps us do that. And then the human to verify and activate everything. I talked a lot about efficiency, productivity, and speed. Yes, it's a fantastic tool for all of these things, but we need to see beyond that. And we'll see we'll talk about creativity with Aurélie in a minute. Creativity and innovation are the bigger goals. The technology can do a lot of things for us, not just the improvement of the current. It really is meant to help us think different and think bigger in a way. So with that, go for it. Give it a go. The technology is amazing. If you haven't started, you should really go for it. But do that with your eyes wide open. It is not magic. It is not a black box. Use it the right way. It is an enabler for speed and efficiency and productivity, but also for innovation and creativity. We strongly believe that human intelligence, as we talk about artificial intelligence, human intelligence must remain at the heart. And that's what we're preaching, the blending of the human intelligence with the artificial intelligence. And think of the human intelligence as what I said before. The art of the question, the iteration of the questions, the conversations you need to have with the generative AI models, and also the data you need to inject at the right time, the right data at the right time to improve and enhance the publicly available models that you must use in a safe, protected way. There is a wide open future where innovations will emerge. And today I talked about the retrospective of 23 and our mass experiments. We didn't have the time to dwell into the solutions we've created for our clients that are really wow, because they bring the innovation and creativity and the unbelievable speed all together. There may be another time for us to do that. But so with that, I'll conclude my section just again, inviting you to jump on the train as it's starting to the station. Again, think of the internet. Don't stay with the fax and the landline. Give it a go. It's amazing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Michel, for that wise advice and that complete tour of the territory. Even if I had a human hallucination when you reminded me of the fax machine and that horrible paper that used to sit around the office those years ago. Now, you reminded us to get on the train. So as I get on the train, what should I not leave behind? If you can leave us with just one piece of advice about what we need to bring on that express train.
Yeah, I would say, well, we could tackle this question in many different ways. Maturity is a very important notion in our conversation. So if you're thinking, how do I talk to my clients, or how do I get my organization to use generative AI more, or how do I talk to my team? You have to assess the degree of maturity. Some people are already, frequent users of the technology you may not know of, or you may know about it. You don't want to talk to them the same way as you would talk to somebody who's heard about it but hasn't tried it yet. You need to show people how they can use it. It does, although it's new and it's exciting and it's been in the news the entire year, there is still that adoption cycle. And as you do that, as I said, you need to equip people with a critical thinking. It's just an amazing, a beautiful piece of tech. It's still only tech. It's how we use it that matters. So both the adoption and equipping people on how to use it well with the safety nets that you need to put in place in terms of the platform you need to use. The public models are dangerous. Beware for a professional usage. Diagnosticity, use different models from different companies as well. And then have that critical thinking and be equipped with the art of the question, the prompt engineering.
Lovely. Thank you for that wise advice. And we'll certainly be coming back to all of these topics next year. You made a point about maturity, and that perhaps brings me on to our next speaker, because the art of creativity and communications is a craft with at least some maturity, I think, already. And we're delighted that you've been able to spend some time thinking about what we learnt from some of the great advertising strategies and campaigns of the year just gone. So, Aurélie, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me, Simon. It's always a pleasure to be part of your KISS webinar. So yes, I think let's come back to the previous charts, maybe. Thank you so much. So yes, and thank Simon, we can't ignore the world in which we're living, for sure, and you made a perfect introduction about that, right? So I just wanted to reflect on 2023 best advertising strategies. And I think that the key insight here is really that we should remind ourselves that we need to make people feel what they feel in our daily life and in their daily lives, right? And to be close as much as possible of them. And if I have to summarize the best advertising strategy that have been used by the brands this year, it really relies on 3 dimensions. The first one is really about shaping expectation of people to integrate, in communication their context. That's my second point on the chart. And the last chart is really, finally, to really act with empathy. And I would like to drive you through these 3 pillars with concrete examples today. So let's move forward. And the reason why I want to illustrate those pillars, it's because they resonate even more nowadays when people rather trust brand, that's what we see on these slides, right, than governments, for instance, to help. And it happens all around the world. And if I may quote just one brand like Corona, which have absolutely understood and leveraged context in which people are living. So I would like to show you a great campaign that has been awarded by Cannes Lions this year. And this great campaign is called the Extra Lime, right? It addresses Chinese farmers' difficult context that happened after COVID, and they have enabled them to produce lime domestically. They're creating a new extra lime business, actually, and they've sold it in tandem with Corona. And they developed this successful great campaign, as you can see on this slide, which has been, absolutely beneficial to Corona and also to the people. And to celebrate this initiative, Corona, as I was saying, has been awarded by, a great lion, titanium lion this year. There is also another example that I would like to talk about today, and you mentioned it, Simon. I mean, the second example is about inflation, and how can we ignore it, right? It's part of our everyday context. But I will not talk about shrinkflation or price or promo strategies, right? What I want to make sure to leverage today is because, we're clear and we're very close to Christmas. So I really want to leverage here people's mental resilience, and they're willing not to give up on holidays, basically. And that's why travel agencies as Booking, as Hilton have leveraged a positive tone and humor. And as a key fact, this year we've reached the highest score since 2011 that we do see increasing the share of Europeans intending to travel despite inflation. So of course, adaptations are being made, right, to deal with inflation. Cheaper accommodations, last minute deals, travel duration will not be reduced anyhow, right? So, but enough talk, maybe it would be nice to watch the Hilton latest advertising.
Check in, madam. Would you like any extras added to your stay?
Daily safe charge. Electricity?
Yeah.
So these weren't included when I booked?
No.
So am I paying for this?
Yeah.
Here's your warm DoubleTree cookie.
Am I paying for this?
No, it's on us.
Thank you.
When you don't want to trawl the small print, it matters where you stay. DoubleTree by Hilton. Hilton for the stay.
Yeah, and really, I mean, Hilton have particularly well understood people's expectation and the mood, right? So they're reflecting with humor on how it is great to actually live on holidays with the right company, which is mean like only paying, for the right things. And so very, very nice example here with Hilton and Booking this year, which has planned on the McCarthy Estuary. But there is also another important expectation from people this year. And, brands still need to break stereotypes and close the gender gap. As you may see, almost 41% think the main role of women in society is to be good mothers and wives. And almost 25% agree that a man who stays at home to look after his children is less of a man. So clearly, I think we can say that stereotypes still need a little kick, to close the gender gap. And I would like to share a wonderful example. A wonderful example coming from a campaign from BBDO, for Ariel, is asking us the question, is laundry only a woman's job? And this year, BBDO tried to answer that question by moving the expectations further. And they explore in advertising the long-term impact of household chores on marriage and relationships in India. So let me explain and let's watch it. So when it plays, and as you can see, the voiceover, it's a fantastic piece of art, not even a creative piece of art, and the reason why this campaign is so successful is not just because it is super creative, right? It is also because, first of all, it plays on the context of people, right? Chores are seen as female tasks where males seldom contribute. The second reason why it is such a great piece of art, in my opinion, it's because it highlights a key tension, right? And you can see the trouble that, the parents, after a long-lasting relationship, a long terms, of years of marriage, things have fallen apart. And actually, older couples can silently slowly get apart, right? And the third reason why it's a great campaign, it's because it also meets the aspirations, the expectation. And by doing that, they are actually setting a new social norm. And what I mean by that is the fact that we are saying, we are looking at this guy now sharing the load with his own wife. So actually there's great advertising plays on those three dimensions. And you see that in the end, on screen, mission is accomplished. We have leveraged the social norm and leveraged the key insight in the advertising. So of course, it's not, a surprise that I'm telling you that this campaign turned into a massive impact on the market and creating a lot of enthusiasm on social. So in the end, as Josie Paul, who is the people that you can see on this chart from BBDO, who is the initiator of this great campaign, I would say, to summarize this campaign, that creativity is sensitivity in a world when no one is listening. Wow, what a strong sentence, right? But don't just take my word or his word, I would say, because it has been proven from our database, from Ipsos database, that when you combine creativity with empathy, it actually brings you a lift in your effectiveness of 20%. I think now is the time to conclude. Right. And if I have to summarize of what made a strong creative able to create the strong connections with people in our nowadays world, I would summarize in 3 ways. And no surprise that those are the 3 points I mentioned earlier in my presentation. But let me put some meat on those bones. First, it's about shaping expectation. This is really about what people feel and believe about a brand. And people reward brand inspiring with purpose. The second one, it's about integrating context. It is what is happening in people's life. It is really about reflecting the world and the world around them. So it's really about the micro, but also the macro context. And here, the agility and the reactivity are essential in such an uncertain world. And thirdly, acting with empathy. Understand what is important for the people, showing them that we are sharing their values, and act to care and people in their day-to-day life is so important because empathy in the end actually amplifies creative effectiveness. And if advertising can drive equity and belonging, I think it has a superpower and a mission to bring us back together in such a difficult world and creating magnificent campaigns which are also empathetic. And that would be all, guys, for me. Thanks a million for all your attention, and over to you, Simon.
Well, thank you, Aurelie. It's not quite all because these are inspiring examples, full of success. But if I can just bring us down a bit, can you tell me what we shouldn't do if we are looking to land a good campaign?
Yeah, and here I'm going to quote Michel. I mean, he was mentioning that we will talk in another time about creative, but I think that keeping human in the loop is essential to everything, right? And it has to be kept in the loop from the beginning, because sometimes the mistake that I do see is that we're testing assets too late in the process. But if we want to make sure that we are creating this specific connection, understanding, expectation, context, and empathy, we have to start from the beginning to make sure that we are keeping the insight as we go. So don't test the beginning on one side and the assets on the other side, but test those combined. And I will be more than happy to tell you more about that.
Thank you so much. Right, so staying focused and thinking about the big picture. It's time for us to go to China and for Patrick to help us understand a bit more about the year just was and help us understand more about what China's next phase may look like. Thank you, Patrick, for being with us.
Thanks, Simon, and thank you, everybody. Welcome to China. So by the end of 2022, China eventually ended the zero COVID policy. And then in late December to early January, all of a sudden, like 1.4 billion Chinese people all got affected and then recovered like within 2 months. So as a result, by the end of January this year, which was the Chinese New Year, the whole pandemic thing already ended in this market. And as you can imagine, that was a very hopeful Chinese New Year. Everyone was looking forward to a really business growing 2023. However, the case turned out to be much tougher than everybody thought. I mean, if you take a look at the GDP growth, it's still pretty good with more than 5% growth, and the Chinese government will meet its goal in the end of the year. However, if you live in this market and if you talk to anyone who is working in this market, no matter which sector they're from, most likely they will tell you that this is the toughest year they experienced in the past several years, even comparing with the time during the pandemic. And one of the indicators could be the inflation thing. So the consumer price index in China actually kept at a very low level. While the whole world is struggling with inflation, China didn't have an inflation issue even during the pandemic time. And in the past November, the latest number we had was the CPI actually dropped by 0.5%. So right now, the concern is more over deflation rather than inflation, and hopefully we don't have that deflation in the coming months or years. So when the general picture looks much more challenging than it was in the past, what should we watch in China's next phase? And there are several different aspects we can look from. The first one, on the economy side, we should keep an eye on the property sector, especially its debt. You may have heard of like huge numbers of those property debt in China right now, especially, for example, this one company called Evergrande. By single one company that has over 300 billion US dollar debt. Well, if you take a look at the overdue debt, it's a little bit better, but the numbers are still very scary. However, if you dig deeper into those numbers, you would realize that China's government has been on this ever since 2020. So right now, the situations are actually under control. If we take a look at the top 20 developers in the property sector in China nowadays, their liabilities to assets ratio actually is below 70%, and the cash to short-term debt usually is bigger than 1.4 times bigger. Which means, even though many people are saying this is a potential factor for a financial crisis, it is for China's government and the market more issue of a risk management. But still, worth take a look at it. Population and aging is the big issue here. So back to 10 years ago, we had almost 20 million newborn every year. Last year, we only had fewer than 10 million, which led to the first time in recent decades, the population decline in China. And this year, the estimation is we will have fewer than 8 million newborn. So the decline will actually accelerate. And maybe in 10 years, you will see the population drop by about 10 million every year. The thing is, as population are declining, aging also becomes a key issue. However, most brands and companies are not really ready to this. At least they are not fully aware of how fast and strong the impact could be. Many companies are still arguing whether they should hire anybody over 35 years old, which is crazy, especially in a market where the median age of the country is already 38 years old. So for any brands and companies, if you can have the right strategy for elder employee and elder consumers, then you have a better chance to win the next decade or next decades in China. While the general macro context is more challenging, we also see more opportunities for the value brands, and we want to share some business signals here. And the first one is about travel. So travel sector is one of the few sectors which really grew pretty well this year in China. Taking the past national holidays in October as an example, the total domestic travel numbers already increased 4.2% comparing to 2019, which was before pandemic. However, the total spending only increased by 1.5%, which means the average spending actually decreased per travel. Live streaming commerce is still a big thing. Again, it's the value brands who are winning on that. The celebrities we introduced in the past 2 years webinar, Austin Lee, ran into a huge controversy this year when selling a cosmetic product at $10 per piece. And somebody just complained that it was too expensive, and he, for some reason, blamed the consumer for not making enough money. And I don't want to make a judgment on this, which sounds terrible. However, at least that's in contradiction with the spirit on live streaming commerce, which is where the value brands can win the market. The coffee sector is another one which had a huge growth in China this year. However, the growth was not led by the one you expected, Starbucks, but by a local player called Luckin. And Luckin is famous for their 9.9 Chinese yuan coffee, which is around $1.5 each. At the same time, the quality actually is really good, and their innovations are also very successful in the market. And the last signal would be on e-commerce. Alibaba, who has Tmall and Taobao, actually is not the superstar on the market this year. PDD, who focused on selling low-priced products on e-commerce, their market cap actually surpassed Alibaba in the past year. And this signal even spreads to a wide market. And if you live in different markets, you may have heard about this app called Temu. They're also focusing on selling low-priced products, and their downloads can be even more than Walmart and Amazon. Behind that actually is the company PDD, in Chinese called Pinduoduo, on the right. And last but not least, let's still watch the new technology, which is quite important in this market. AI is the most important and heated topic this year. Well, China's internet giant followed the OpenAI and ChatGPT really fast, building the LLM based on Chinese language. As Michelle said, it is a necessity for having different language bases. But for investors, maybe it's more practical to take a look at the applications side. The applications layer made huge progress in this year in China and even for Ipsos. And the new energies where the government is investing into, that includes the wind power, solar power, energy storage, and also the batteries, which also leads to the success of automobile industry, which is another one grew pretty well this year. So the new energy vehicles in China penetration rate already reached 35%, which is really high. If you come to China, you will see all of those new energy vehicles on the street. That also helped China to become the #1 car exporter in the world for the first time in history this year. And 30% of the exported cars were actually new energy vehicles. And the last one is to watch the social media again. Everyone is familiar with TikTok, but in China, there's other players like Red, like Kwai. And there's a newcomer, which is really interesting, called Real Short. It climbed really high on certain app store rankings. And it is an app of short, like mini drama episodes. Behind that, surprisingly, is another Chinese company. So to conclude this, if we really want to understand where we are right now and what to watch next, you have to understand that this is a market, even with a slower growing speed, that is still a huge economy base with very solid growth volume. And because of the culture of the perseverance in this market, Chinese populations tend to keep hard working, no matter what the environment around them looks like. So if you can understand the resilience, you will always find the potential for growth, no matter you are an investor or a brand. Back to you, Simon.
Well, thank you, and great advice about that point about resilience and continuity, and indeed, as you've got on the slide, perseverance. So thank you again for that, for your guided tour. And on this call, we've got people from, I think, 80 countries around the world. So many of us aren't China experts. Is there one piece of business advice you could give to somebody from outside China looking to better understand the market?
Yeah, I would really suggest, brands to be more practical and also watch the business signals more carefully. And the thing is, the business signals, they really come fast and they really come in a lot of numbers. However, because of the old habits and old beliefs in this market, many times brands tend to ignore those, or at least convince themselves those business signals are not true. However, the fact is the big environment really changed. So watch the business signals and react fast. That's what you need to do on this market right now.
Okay, and I've got thank you, Patrick. And I've got live questions now coming through, so I'm going to stay with you just for one moment, if that's all right. And it's about it's about the property debt and your take on what that might mean in terms of economic prospects for the coming year.
Yeah. So I think why we need to watch that is because the government focus is on that. I think the big argument is many people are questioning why Chinese government is not stimulating the consumption or on the consumer side. But the case is, for the government's view, if they can manage the government debt, and the property debt well, then the whole financial system will keep its stableness. And as a result, as I said, because the general population and market has this huge base and solid growth, they don't have to worry too much on that. So that's why we need to watch on that, but have some faith in what we have done. It looks to me, at least, most likely it will be well handled in the coming year or coming 2 years.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And again, a reminder that thinking about that the full system thing, and the point about the signals, I think, was also interesting, because just a reminder, when you were showing the number of births in absolute terms, it's a lot because you're such a big market. But those differences from 19 million to 9 million really stark. Thank you, Patrick. I'm going to come to Michelle now, and I've got a question from somebody I think might be more on the worried side about AI. AI is learning how to lie. Do we understand what we're doing?
Well, I don't think AI has learned how to lie. It's a very human thing. So it's probably just emulating our ability to invent, be creative, or sometimes indeed, twist reality a little bit. As I said, it's all about how you use it, and it's a superpower. And there is a source of concern in the fact that superpower used the wrong way can lead to bad things. And of course, one must think about 2024, which is around the corner, which is a year in which 2 billion people in the democratized world will go to election booths, with big elections in many countries, including the United States or the United Kingdom. I don't know if you remember the infamous, or famous for the wrong reason, deep fakes of Hillary Clinton wearing a hijab, etc., right, during that campaign back then.
Yeah.
Well, that needed or required fairly sophisticated government-backed agencies or like hacker groups with financial backing and a good organization. Now Joe Schmo can do that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. That said, I'm an optimist by nature, and you may have seen in the news that the European Union has come up with the first draft of an AI Act, and that's also unprecedented, right? The time it took, which is very little time for something as complicated and as new, the little time it took to the European Union to come up with something, and the fact that they come up with something means that the UK, the US, China already has laws around AI. It's all going to be regulated, and hopefully in the right way. There too, the the governments are moving faster than ever before because they have to. Technology is going at full gallop. So I think we'll be fine as long as we put the right guardrails in place.
Well, you mentioned you're an optimist by nature, and I think, Aurelie, you're an optimist by nature as well. But I've got another potential pessimist on the AI front who's got a question for you. It's a short question. Is AI killing the ad industry?
Yes, of course. Yeah. And it's a topic we talked about in Cannes, for instance, in June. And we continue, and there's no one day where you don't have someone, talking about AI. AI is a fantastic enabler, right? And the reason why I haven't talked about AI today, it's because actually it's already there and people are using it. And I think we should be extremely careful, as Michelle was saying, in the fact that AI is a great tool, great enabler. But what is super important is to make sure that it's still, whatever the story we're lending, there has to be connected some kind of human foundation, right? So it has to be connected to the right insight. So I think that AI is definitely something we have to use in advertising. But when, it comes to creativity and the sources of creativity, I think it can't be in the driving seat, right? It can be on the, next to us, next to human, to help us to drive. But it cannot really initiate strong creativity as we need, to. So AI, great. Human, it's great as well. We just have to use both at the right time in the communication process.
So humans on the train as well.
Yeah.
There's a term that also became more popular in 2023, co-pilots, which
exactly. It has to be a co-pilot. Exactly this. Absolutely.
Well, actually, on that co-pilot point, I'm just one more for you, Michelle. Somebody asking about any advice on what policies and procedures we should put in place in our company to make sure we do the right thing. Any just quick takeaways from your experience this year for colleagues and clients on the call?
Sure. So I mentioned our mass experiments making, our GenAI Ipsos Facto platform available to 20,000 people across Ipsos. You can imagine my colleagues in the legal department going on a total panic mode when I told them we're going to do that. And they're great colleagues. So we worked together on creating an AI policy that people have to accept. People within Ipsos have to accept every time they use the platform. And there's very simple but very important reminders before you use that. First, again, you have to, so now I'm not talking about Ipsos, but talking about people on the call here in the webinar, you have to ask yourself, am I playing in a safe environment or in a public environment? It's two very different things.
Yeah.
Again, if it's free, you're the product. If it's public, it's public, meaning what you input into the machine becomes public information and knowledge that models will be trained upon, etc. So first, there's that, and then there are basic rules to apply, but they were pre-existing for the most part. Personal information, beware, make sure that you do the right thing. Data ownership and fairness, are you using your own data or are you using someone else's data, and are they okay with that? There are basic fundamental questions to ask yourself, before you do so.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna finish on the environment with Patrick. Patrick, question about the population decline points. Is there a debate in China about what it means for the environment and whether it could be a good thing in the long term?
Well, I think definitely that's a good thing in the long term. That's actually where it started. When we talk about the one-child policy in the very beginning years ago, it's for the environment's concern. So right now, definitely people are more confident with fewer population. We have fewer requirements for the resources, which is a good thing. However, it seems that even with a huge number of population, the whole country, I would say population and government brands altogether achieved many things in the past. So the key debate is not around this. The key debate actually is around whether we can reverse or slow down the declining trend, because that could lead to even bigger problems. And at the same time, people have the confidence that we will do what's right for the environment.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Aurélie. Thank you, Michelle, for being with us today. Thank you, everyone, for being on the call. These topics, environment, communications, AI, business strategy, are going to be at the heart of what we are going to be talking about next year in our work with you, our clients around the world. Please join us at the end of January, where we will be looking at different visions of the future as we get into real planning mode about the year ahead. But for now, I wish you all a very peaceful end to the year, and I hope you get a good break, and we look forward to working with you all. Thank you for being with us this year, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. All the very best.
Thank you.